Hello, friends. We are back with episode 186 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. This is the weekly podcast where we talk about the excellent resources that are shared in the highlights section every single week at ourweekly.org. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm delighted you join us from wherever you are around the world. November is already getting close to being complete, but we're not complete here yet because you know who completes me on this show. It is my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
Eric, I'm doing well. I want to extend a warm welcome on behalf of the Blue Sky community to you this week.
Thank you, sir. Yes, it took a little bit, but I found my way there, and it seems like I've connected with a few people already, yourself included. So I'm eager to participate, share my little bits of dev hacking here and there and learnings I've had, such as the post I shared recently about editing these R Pharma workshop recordings and learning new Chordal tricks from the esteemed Nicole Arini. So, I mean, there's all sorts of things I'm learning already. Happy to share that and also learn from awesome people like you at the same time.
Beautiful. Yes. No. Hopefully going forward, I will be, at least myself, be posting the Our Weekly Highlights podcast episodes on there. So we have them both on Mastodon and on Blue Sky for wherever you are on social media today.
Yep, and there's many choices, so that's why we want to make sure we're touching the audiences where they are, so to speak. So yeah, Blue Sky is in our future, so to speak. But we'll talk about the present here. We got a great issue to talk about today, which has been curated by John Calder, another one of our longtime curators on the Our Weekly project. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like you all around the world with your pull requests and other suggestions for resources. And one of the efforts that I've had my eye on for now a couple of years, but has been really gaining a lot of momentum is, of course, we're here talking about the R language, right? Our language is built on the principles of open source, which means that in theory, anybody around the world can contribute to the core of the R language itself. And there has been a concerted effort to bring in new contributors that want to be able to impact the R language, get involved with open source. And that's what we're here to talk about today, where there was a special session at the recent Shiny in Production conference run by our friends at Jumping Rivers a couple months ago, for a special R Developer Day. And this is coming to us from the Jumping Rivers blog, but it was authored by Heather Turner, who has been spearheading this effort of this R contribution working group, which has been a joint effort of the R core team, various community groups, including the R Ladies Initiative, the R Forwards Initiative, the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, and additional members of the R community to really bring in, an easy way to give back and contribute to the R language and helping with that onboarding process. But as such of a developer day, they tackled quite a few issues. And so this post talks about some really interesting issues that they are trying to tackle with the R language and the R project as a whole. So I'll give my take on a few things and then pass the baton to Mike. But the first issue on the docket here is talking about translations. Obviously, a very important part of any open source project to be able to display any, diagnostic messages, other helpful messages that are happening in an R session to the language pertaining to the locale that the user is executing R with. So Heather mentions Gabriela de Lima Marin. She was able to figure out how to contribute to R's Weblate, which is basically a browser that you can see in your R session that gives you like the render documentation and other things like that she was able to build in translational messages, first in a conventional way by translating individual strings at a time, but then leveraging a little bit of machine learning to help with that translation layer. But as with anything with automation, you need to have a set of eyes on it after that finished product, because you might get some issues from time to time. Yours truly has seen this. If you've been listening to our weekly highlights in one of the podcast apps that support transcripts, the transcripts are about 95% of the way there, but there are some corrections I have to make as after we release it, such as, this happens to this day, it thinks the R Weekly Highlights podcast, the R is spelled O-U-R every time we do this transcription. So I have to manually update that. So I'd imagine there were similar things with the translations that Gabriella involved. But the good news is that she was able to translate over 200 messages produced by R on this developer day alone. And this has a link to the issue on the R Dev Day repository where she put in her notes if you want to help contribute to this effort as well. But going side to side with that, they wanted to have, as the project as a whole, with like a more real-time look at the progress of these translations. Where are the gaps? Where are the things that are on track to being completed? So this separate effort was building a translation dashboard. And this was tackled by a few people, Mario Riemann, Midmersilin Hausen Rabi, and Murad Kalilov. Hopefully I said that somewhat correctly, where they wanted to work on this translation dashboard, and within that, 2 specific items to address, one of which is minimizing the dependency footprint by removing the string R dependency, which will help streamline deployments, and then switching from the previous framework of Flex Dashboard over to Quarto, which recently had dashboard support, which I've made excellent use of recently in some open source work. So I fully support that pivot of the infrastructure, and I think that's going to set them up for great success. And there were some issues that they found with looking at supplemental R Markdown rendering, things that they could streamline from the previous infrastructure from Flex Dashboard. So there was a bit of cleanup involved, and also leveraging GitHub Actions and making sure those are working correctly with this new pivot to the Quarto dashboard. And it does sound like they've got a scheduled deployment for this so that it can be updated in real time. But there are links in the post to looking at this in more detail. But it's really looking promising to get kind of a fit-for-purpose look at the progress of the translation of the R language into these different locales that, again, will be a very, very big help for increasing adoption and inclusion in general for looking at the R language itself. And then lastly, from my standpoint, and I'll turn over the mic after this, but there was a slight bug that was found with the Cairo graphics engine, which is used primarily by, maybe it's by default now, I'm not quite sure, but there was a little set of bugs that were being tracked on the Bugzilla page of the R project itself, and then be able to help reset looking at this particular issue where in a plot, there's an example of this in the post itself, there should be a solid color, let's say like a 1-bar bar chart or something. There was a little white line that was, happening in like part of the plot. And why? Doesn't make any sense. So they took a look at the GR devices package, which is now part of base R, to kind of see where we're seeing that crop in. And there's a lot of just investigation to see where this issue was able to find it, but they learned some best practices from developers on this, and to be able to get some advice that was given to them by Paul Merle himself, which has been one of the influential leaders of the graphic devices in R itself. And they figured out there was, a key statement in this plotting the grid rectangle that this example is based from, that there was something being drawn or something not being drawn, apparently, that had to be updated in the C code. And then they found a workaround that was leveraged from the Quartz device engine to fix this white line even happening. So that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of graphic devices, where for me, I know a little bit about the grid system, but this will be way outside my expertise to tackle. But it's a great example of team effort of a couple of developers at this dev day, again, taking advice from Paul Merle and translating that so they could get a reprex of this going, and then really isolating the problem. And then they are working on now the next steps of getting this patch accepted into base R so that the future versions of R won't have this phantom line appearing in these rectangles. So it really had to do with getting involved with not just the graphic device code, but the C code as well, which again, fair play, great way to level up your knowledge, because a lot of R is based in C, some bits in Fortran. So it's a multilingual environment, even of itself with the source code. So really fascinating to see where that takes you. But that's not all, Mike, because apparently there was some container fun to be had on this dev day too.
No, and as you said, R itself is built on a multilingual, somewhat complex environment. And if you want to build R on your own computer, it can be tricky to do so, for the purposes of trying to contribute back to base R itself. So another project that's been undertaken is called the R Dev Container project, which is a VS Code dev container. Well, not necessarily VS Code, but that's one way to leverage it. It's a Docker containerized environment for R that can be launched. If you're in GitHub, you could use GitHub Codespaces or Gitpod, which is pretty cool to be able to essentially develop in the browser, as I understand, using this containerized technology that has everything sort of already there pre-installed for you, all the dependencies that you would need to work on contributing back to the R language itself. One thing I didn't know about GitHub Codespaces is that I think you get like 60 hours, I don't know if it's per month or per year, for free, because GitHub Codespaces sort of spins up a server on the back end for you that allows you to develop in the browser, which is nice. So I know that a lot of those services have a cost associated with them, but it seems like there is a fair amount of free hours that you would get there. An alternative, if you didn't want to use GitHub Codespaces or Gitpod, would be to do it locally, essentially. And you would have to have Docker installed, VS Code installed, and the VS Code dev container extension. It's a workflow that we at Catchbrook love, as I've probably talked about on this podcast quite a bit, because it allows you to work in a containerized environment and ensure that everybody has essentially the same dependencies when they're collaborating on a project together. So it's pretty cool. One of the drawbacks is that the dev container is currently built for a specific OS and for a specific architecture that has some buggy things happening on more recent Mac computers. So the team on our Dev Day worked on trying to improve the experience for those who are working on a Mac machine. And unfortunately, I think this depends on the ARM64 architecture, if you will. And, some ARM64 machines, I guess, are not available on GitHub Actions. So they were running into a few limitations there, but they definitely made a lot of progress on solving this issue, which is tracked as issue number 112 of the RDev environment GitHub repository, which I did not know existed until the highlights came out this week, which is pretty cool. It sort of warms my heart that so many of these efforts, not just the fact that it's using a technology that I love in Docker containers, but it seems like there's a lot of efforts going along with our Dev Day that are trying to make it a lot more approachable and easy to actually contribute back to the R-based project itself, because that can be pretty daunting. I mean, when you think about making a contribution to the language itself and not just a particular package, that's pretty scary to me. And one of the reasons being so is that, as you mentioned, Eric, a lot of this is built on non-R code, right? C or Fortran code. But a lot of it probably is in R code as well. So it depends upon your comfort level. And I think there's always a place to get started if you are, willing to put in a little bit of time and effort to take a look at the Bugzilla that's out there and all the bugs that are tracked well as part of the R project, and see if you can find one that would be interesting for you to try to take a crack at. And now that we have the R Dev Container project, you can literally have everything you need to start working on that essentially at your fingertips in the click of a button, which is pretty cool. And going along with trying to make things easier for those contributing to the project is that there's an initiative out there in trying to create an R development guide, or an R dev guide for short, to document some of these processes and document, how you can contribute to the R project and sort of the workflows that might work best for you to be able to accomplish that. So it's a pretty cool resource, maintained again by the contributor community, just like this translations dashboard that's out there. And if you haven't seen the translations dashboard, it's really cool. It was my first time seeing it, which is what we talked about at the top of this highlight. It's a great visual to take a look at how many functions and aggregated up to packages as well have translations for the messages for those particular functions, and then how many don't as well. So it's pretty interesting. And I have to imagine that, as you mentioned, Eric, AI could actually be helpful, I think, in a situation like that. Granted, it's probably not going to get it right 100% of the time, but maybe it'll take some of the legwork out for you. So I think this is a really cool blog post to walk through, how folks were able to contribute on this R Dev Day. I think it's awesome that they even, hosted and had this R Dev Day. They already have one scheduled for 2025 in October. So if you feel like you want to be part of that, there's a registration form that you can sign up today. So kudos to Jumping Rivers.
Yeah, I'm loving to see, giving the opportunity for developers to come together, and especially bringing in new talent, new developers that want to contribute, and really the myriad of issues out there. Yeah, I was looking at the issue tracker itself as you were talking. There is a lot to choose from. There's lots of places that if you're looking at different areas to contribute, I think there's something for everybody here. Even just sifting through this, I see there's an issue about would there a way to connect the Positron IDE, of course, the new IDE offered by Posit, to one of those services like Gitpod over SSH to have that remote R session as a backend instead of having to have it locally. That's very similar to what I've been doing on my local VS Code setup with my dev container Dockerized environment, albeit much like you said in the outset of your description there, I've only optimized my dev container stuff on Linux because that's what I'm developing on. I never tried on ARM processors for Mac, so I'm sure it wouldn't work there. It gets really dicey in these situations, but to be able to have these development environments going wherever the user is, whether it's x86 based like our typical Windows or Linux, architecture, or the more recent ARM64, like these fancy MacBook M1s, M2s, M3s, M4s, too many M's out there. But nonetheless, they are becoming way more popular. So to be able to have that experience out there, yeah, it's going to take a lot of engineering. But just imagine being able to have that whole development stack of R itself without you having to think about, how do I compile Fortran code on my Mac? Oh, gosh.
Mm-hmm.
No, having this in a containerized environment just opens the doors for so many possibilities here.
Couldn't agree more.
Rounding out our highlights today, we got another visit to a visualization corner of sorts, and this is very similar to last week where we had a notebook style presentation of an infographic. Here we've got an interesting visualization on the thickness of ice in Greenland. This post is authored by Michael, not the same Mike that's joining me on this show, but Michael, and we don't know his last name because that's how we got on the blog. But nonetheless, if you're listening, Michael, feel free to send us your detailed info after this if you like. But nonetheless, he has authored on his blog this very notebook-style post on looking at how to visualize the ice thickness in a very innovative mapping heat map structure using data that's either available or processed into via typical tidyverse function. So we'll dive into this, and specifically, he is using the Greenland 5-kilometer DEM ice thickness and bedrock elevation grids. That's a mouthful, but nonetheless, he's got a link to download, I believe, the CSV after you register for that service, and once you have that, you can read this into your session, and apparently it's an ASCII style file, and he's got a link to the user guide to look at this, but he mentions that the wrangling, not quite straightforward. So there is a collection here of data processing with mutating, grouping, modifying, more mutation, more pivoting with the tidyr package. And in the end, he's able to finally get to a format to compose this as a raster image, which again, you're talking to a novice with spatial visualization. So I always learn on the fly. But the first render here in the post is a raw mapping of Greenland, but with the color gradient, if you will, based on the thickness. And the plot itself is only like 1-2 lines of code after you feed in that tidy data set. So the meat of it was in the processing to get this initial visualization, but very nice, straightforward, heat map-like representation of the ice thickness. And as you might imagine, the closer to the center of Greenland you get, the more thicker the ice is, as opposed to the outer layers near the ocean. But then there's more that you can do here, Mike, and that's where we turn to our friendly leaflet projection time. What do we have in store there?
All right, so using a combination of the leaflet package and the Terra package, I believe, Michael's able to modify the original data frame that he called thick that was used for the first static plot and use a function called project in Rast in concert to be able to build this new object called thick WGS84, which is really the main object that's supplied to the leaflet function add raster image here. So that's going to be this raster image that he's able to supply to leaflet that does most of the heavy lifting, and then a really nice gradiented palette legend that is up at the right hand corner of the chart. And obviously you have the interactive zoom in, zoom out functionality to be able to explore this in sort of more of an interactive leaflet context. So really nice 2 different plots sort of visualizing, fairly the same data set on Greenland ice thickness. And it's just really well concisely written code. So if you are in the geospatial space or interested in the thickness of ice in Greenland, this one's going to be for you.
Yes, and some of the inspiration where this came from, at the top of the post, he mentions that this is part of the 30-day map challenge that's currently ongoing. So if you want to hone up on your visualization skills and kind of be part of a community of aspiring data scientists and visualization experts doing this, he's got a link to the 300 map day challenge, which again, if I had infinite time, I probably would get my hand at that. But my last adventure with leaflet was ironically for this past R Pharma conference, where I built this I call Haunted Places Shiny app, where I had a leaflet map of the U.S., the United States, but then each city where this, quote, haunted place was located at, I use another data set to get the coordinates and throw it on the leaflet. Not too dissimilar to what Michael has done here, but it's amazing just with a few lines of code, you can get this interactive map up right away, and I'm sure you could add way more to this, but in the end, it does the job, and it does it really well and really concisely. So great example of what you can do in the R side of things with spatial visualization. And yeah, I'll be keeping my eye out on his blog as well as others on social media to see what other creative maps that people are creating with R these days.
Absolutely. And one thing I love about the blog post is that he finished it off by adding 3 references that I believe correspond to maybe some of the data sets that were used or references on the topic itself. So fantastic attribution here.
Yep, and if my eyes don't deceive me, this looks like a Quarto-based blog if I had to guess, but nonetheless,
For sure.
great posts on Michael's blog here, so definitely check that out. But also check out, everything else in R Weekly we got going here. Admittedly, due to time, we don't have time for our additional find segments, but rest assured there's another great collection of new packages and awesome, Shiny app links here. I saw a few there that caught my eye, and other upcoming events and whatnot. So as always, every issue has got a mix of everything for everybody. How does the issue get created, folks? It's not automated. As much as we love to have machines take over certain automation things, this is a human-created effort, but honestly, it's going to stay that way. Well, we rely on you out there, too, to help with the project. So one of the best ways you can do that, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to contribute. And honestly, the whole Git and GitHub model is what drives R Weekly, where if you find a great resource that you think should be shared, we are a pull request away, folks. It's just a markdown file in the end. Every issue here is just a markdown file. If you can read markdown, you can contribute to our weekly. So it's just a pull request away. At the upper right corner, the little AutoCAD image, give you straight to this week's issue draft, and then you can send the pull request right then and there and help us with that new resource you have found. And also, we love hearing from you in the audience as well. It's amazing that 2024 is already almost over, but of course, we love seeing what our weekly has done for you in terms of like shared learning or other tidbits. You can get in contact with us a few different ways. We have a contact page in the episode show notes in your podcast player that you can link to and click on and send us some feedback there. We are also with a modern podcast app. You can send us one little boost along the way to share your love for the show there directly to us. And lastly, but not least, we are on these social medias as well, where apparently I got another thing to share now, but I am mostly on Mastodon still with @our_podcast at podcastindex.social. And now I am on Blue Sky as well, as Mike mentioned. I am @our_podcast at bsky.social as well. If you want to find me there, I'm happy to connect. I've already connected with a few of my good friends already back again, and love to connect with more of you. But Mike, last but not least, I'm also on LinkedIn as well. You search my name and you'll find me there. But Mike, where can they find a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on Mastodon, I think at Mike_Thomas at fosstodon.org. You can find me probably more often on Blue Sky. Now it seems to be the one I'm checking a little bit more, at Mike-Thomas.bsky.social. Or if you search Ketchbrook Analytics on LinkedIn, you can find me there as well, KETCHBROOK.
Very good stuff. And also, you do have a blog out there too on your Ketchbrook Analytics site. I was just checking that out for some stuff I'm doing, little off the cuff here, but in my infrastructure at home, I just spun up a self-hosted RSS aggregator. So when you put an RSS feed, Mike, I'll be able to put your blog on mine too. I couldn't quite get it, but we'll follow up offline on that one. But nonetheless, Mike's got a cool blog out there. Check that out.
Yeah, just don't look at the last blog post date because it's been a little while.
Hey, no shame in that. Look at my last episode of the R podcast itself. Then I'll feel shame. Nonetheless, I hope you don't feel shame about listening to this episode. We do our best to give you the great resources that are shared on our weekly. So that'll wrap up episode 186. That means we're 14 away from 200. One way or another, we'll get there. So until then, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And we should be back for another episode of our weekly highlights next week.